Chapter 3. One thing I've got to ask, Riker said, is whether anyone else is getting the damnedest sense of deja vu. The senior staff had assembled for a briefing in the conference lounge, though they had only had such briefing less than 6 hours earlier to fine-tune the logistics relating to their mission on Alteron 5. This one had been arranged for a much more specific and far more unusual reason. Data frowned, just a little. I will confess that many of our conferences are quite similar in layout, Commander. I've noticed that Lieutenant Worf has seated in that precise chair more than 75% of the... Not the meeting, Data, Riker corrected. I mean this doctor. Picard was in the midst of massaging his temples with one hand, but he managed a wan smile. I presume you're referring to our illustrious visitor from not too long ago, Mr. Rasmussen. Exactly, Riker agreed, spreading his hands as if in supplication. Both of them were eccentric men in little ships, loosely speaking, that were supposedly capable of time travel. Both ended up on the Enterprise, both claiming that they lacked background information of one sort or another, both acting like they owned the place, neither giving us any specifically useful information, just more and more questions. Only Rasmussen turned out to be a con man from the past. So how can we be sure this doctor doesn't have some ulterior motive? Picard thought about it for a moment before replying. I will confess, both have similarities. Both talk too much, Worf muttered under his breath. But at the same time, Rasmussen came with a seemingly legitimate, if not unusual, explanation for his presence. He had had an indisposably advanced vessel, knowledge of who we all were and of the Enterprise, enough to evidence to create an adequate cover, as any competent con man would need. This doctor, on the other hand, has a story, an origin, a methodology, and a style that all seem to scream impossibility. It's as if he stepped from a children's bedtime story, a madman with a magic box. If someone wishes to deceive us, there are certainly more reasonable ways to go about it. There is another possibility, Worf rumbled. Q. That thought had occurred to me, Mr. Worf, Picard admitted. Actually, the thought occurred to me whenever anything unusual happens, but it's unlike Q to work behind the scenes like this. He usually likes to flaunt his actions, proudly proclaim responsibility for them. This sort of deception would be uncharacteristic of him. So what? Asked Riker, running a hand across his jaw. We're just going to accept that we've been visited by a bow-tie-wearing time traveler in a wooden box from another dimension? I think, Picard said slowly, until we have evidence to directly contradict his story, we have to at least take some of what he says on faith, though we should not drop our guard just yet. Dr. Crusher, what precisely did your examination reveal? What is he? I honestly don't know what to call him, Crusher admitted, sitting back in her chair. He seems perfectly human on the outside, but medical scans show a completely alien biology, unlike anything I've encountered before. 2 hearts, cerebral activity completely off the charts, a metabolism that seems to require very little food. There are organs and neurological structures that I can't even begin to guess at, some of which might even hint at telepathic ability. Even a DNA analysis is raising more questions than it's answering. It's almost as if his genetic code had been repeatedly torn apart and stitched back together again in a different sequence, as it's littered with fragmented genomes and in a state of constant flux. Even more bizarre than that, however, are the small trace amounts of radiation in his tissue. Radiation? Picard stiffened a little. Is it dangerous? I don't think so, she replied, shaking her head. I ran an analysis of the energy pattern. There isn't an exact match of it, but it did indicate trace amounts of chronoton particles. They're infused in every cell of his body somehow. I can't even begin to guess as to the effect it would have on him, on how it got there. I see. Clearing his throat, Picard turned to his chief engineer. What have you learned about his vessel? Well, we're not even sure if it's even a ship, Captain, the Forge added, climbing to his feet and activating the wall monitor. A wireframe schematic of the strange box appeared. Every scan we've tried running says it's just a wooden box. Not even my visor's picking up anything unusual, except for 2 things. First, the box is blue, but I'm not picking up any trace of paints. Nothing lead-based, acrylic, anything to explain the color. It's as if the wood itself just grew that shade. For that matter, the grain of wood doesn't match anything on file. It doesn't even seem to have a consistent grain, as if someone just decided wood without specifically specifying the species of tree it came from. No evidence of nails, bolts, not even adhesive. Nothing to explain what keeps it together. Second is the fact that I can't pick up any sort of emissions or trace particles to clue me in on what's inside. The door seems to have a primitive 20th century locking mechanism, but the lock... Captain, the first scan told me there were 807 tumblers inside. The second scan told me there weren't any at all. The third one said the door wasn't even there. I don't think we're going to be able to get past that lock without a key, assuming that it even uses a proper key. And I can't even say what will happen if we try to force our way inside. If the door is indeed constructed of wood, Worf suggested, a phaser could cut through it without difficulty. Captain, Data interjected before Picard could respond to that. I could not recommend attempting to breach its hull. The spatial distortions I have previously detected are still present, and I cannot predict what will occur if we would try to rupture its surface. Picard nodded slowly at that, hands folded on the table in front of him. He was silent for a brief moment, and then settled back into his chair, tugging at his uniform top as he came to a decision. Agreed. Besides which, our guest has shown no hostile intent as of yet. I believe breaking down his front door isn't warranted. Not as things currently stand. For now, we'll keep him confined to quarters, Picard decided, at least until we have a better idea of just what he wants, and what he's capable of. Mr. Worf, post a constant security detail around his vessel. Have them remain alert for any activity that might suggest he's not the sole applicant. Aye, sir, the Klingon rumbled. Counselor, Picard continued, we still have a little time before we reach our destination. I would like you to pay him a visit. You said earlier that his agitation was preventing you from reading him too deeply. If he's settled down, then I would like to see what you can learn from him. I shall do my best, Captain, Troy replied, her head inclining slightly. Excellent. Picard climbed to his feet, and the rest of the bridge officers followed suit. The rest of you, prepare for our primary objective. I want the first engineering and medical teams beamed down within moments of our arrival, but first, lest anyone misinterpret, I would like to reiterate that this doctor, though certainly a mystery, has shown us no hostility, and, caution aside, should therefore be treated as a guest. With good fortune, we shall soon learn more about him, and if his plight is genuine, hopefully, we'll be able to render him our assistance. Dismissed. The door chime had the doctor jump straight just a little, head swiveling towards the door. Clearing his throat and turning the screen deliberately towards the washroom, where it wasn't in sight of the door, he climbed to his feet, tugged at the sleeves of his shirt, and then announced, come in! The door hissed open to reveal Deanna Troi and the shoulders of the two guards who had been assigned to flank the door from the outside. Stepping inside, she waited until the doors closed before turning her full attention to the Time Lord, giving him a small, friendly smile, even as her extrasensory perception strained to read past the unpredictable energy that seemed to perpetually bubble on the surface of the doctor's emotions. Doctor, she greeted, head bowing. How are you feeling? Oh, much better, came the chipper reply as he gestured vaguely to the screen, shifting at the center of the room. Just been catching up on my reading, as it were. Would you care to take a seat? Thank you, she replied graciously, shifting to settle in on the couch. The Time Lord chose the comfortable recliner just beside it, crossing his leg over his knee a bit awkwardly as his thin limbs sought to find proper posture. At the end of it, he looked like he had been stuffed into the push plush cushions. There was a long, full minute of silence as the doctor stared at her, clearly waiting for her to say something, but she just watched him, patiently, clearly waiting to see what he'd do. So, the Time Lord shifted in his chair once again, lips quirking into a small smile as he realized he was actually feeling a bit uncomfortable. You're the ship's counselor. Are you really the only one on board? Yes, I am, she replied, inclining her head once. Impressive. He paused, lips pursing, and then pointed at her, eyes narrowing dramatically. With over 1,000 people on this vessel, your schedule must be dreadfully hectic. Sometimes, she replied, smiling wildly. I prefer to think of it as rewarding, or at the very least keeps me from growing restless. I take it you've been utilizing the ship's library? Mm-hmm. Fascinating, it truly is, the doctor replied, settling back into the plush chair. I skimmed through your anthropological files, didn't want to embarrass myself in front of any unfamiliar races again, and the material's a bit dry. So much more exciting to meet new races face to face. I did so very much enjoy your crew manifest, and the ship's service records, however, have been a personal fascination of mine. Life stories and the like. I see, Troy replied, nodding. Whose service records did you examine? Oh, he replied, all of them. The entire crew manifest? Troy echoed blankly. Even though she could sense no deception from it, she wasn't entirely sure if she could believe it. And just how much have you learned from it? Well, for one, Ensign Taggart in engineering most certainly deserves a promotion, the doctor replied idly. Headed the last 7 shipwide diagnostics and helped coordinate the refit and repair after your encounter with the Borg. Absolutely criminal that he's a lieutenant by now, no matter what discipline problems she's been reported for. I'll pass that along to Commander LaForge, Troy replied slowly. I must confess, I'm more than a little impressed. Oh, my people are quick learners, always have been. In fact, I do believe someone once described me as having higher alien intelligence. He paused right after admitting the proud statement before adding in a mumble, well, hair of an idiot too, but if you saw her style of do, you wouldn't be taking her word for it. Something about the way he said suggested not just embarrassment, but a certain fond nostalgia. And she didn't have to be empathic to realize the very mention had saddened him. Are you all right? No, it's all right. The doctor smiled a little, but it was a very small, very old smile. They were just better times. Sensing that it was perhaps a subject that would not be well received, she chose a different tact. You spoke of your people. Can you tell me about them? That proved to be a terrible mistake, as the sudden spasm of guilt, pain, and anger that roared from the doctor's psyche like a wildfire at the subject all but froze the breath in her throat. Even though the Time Lord hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even twitched, well, to Troy, the emotional barrage felt like he had lunged across the room to grab her by the throat. My people, he replied quietly, his face seeming to age 50 years at the very mention, even as a hand awkwardly tugged at his bow tie. With all due respect, Counselor, those were considerably worse times. I'd rather not discuss them. As you wish. Troy had edged away in her seat a bit, as if seeking physical distance from the pain that leaked from him like a pus from a boil. But as it slowly faded to a dull throb, she relaxed a little. Your arrival here was accidental, wasn't it? The doctor shook himself slightly out of his thoughts, turning his attention back to her. Oh, yes. Well, consider the fact that my atoms aren't scattered halfway across the galaxy is a very positive thing. Good day so far. From what the captain has told me, the very actions that brought you here could be considered reckless, Troy pointed out, hesitantly for a moment before adding, I hope you don't take offense, but in my experience, when people undertake such extensive risk, they either seek to brush against death for the thrill or welcome it with open arms. Could either apply to you? Something flickered in his eyes at that moment, just for a brief moment before being hidden by his usual mischievous glimmer. She was obviously hitting far too many buttons, and she could all but feel the emotional wall go up, sealing his true feelings behind a shroud of enthusiasm and sparkling wit. No, I imagine death will find a way of reaching me without any of my help, he finally replied, trying to sound casual as he could. It reaches all of us, doesn't it? It would be more accurate, I think, to say that I enjoy making my mark on history, being the first to succeed at something that would certainly have been a feather in my cap. Troy nodded at that, but still didn't look convinced. Not quite. But just as she opened her mouth to try another tact, her communicator chirped. Counselor Troy, Data's voice peeped through. Please report to the bridge. On my way, getting back to her feet, she gave the doctor another smile. I'm sorry to leave you so soon, but we're arriving at a destination. The Enterprise has an assignment to complete, and the captain needs all senior officers present. An assignment? The doctor asked, putting on his best charming smile as he rose to his feet. Mind if I pop up there with you a little bit? I do enjoy helping, and I'd go nanas stuck in this room all day. I was just also hoping to speak with your captain about the condition of my TARDIS. Troy smiled softly but shook her head. I'm afraid the operation we're undertaking is very delicate. All non-essential personnel are being asked to remain in their quarters until its completion. It should be only a few hours. I'll be happy to come back and resume our discussion afterwards, if you like, and I'll be certain to inform the captain that you wish to speak with him. The doctor's smile faded a little, but he nonetheless bobbed his head agreeably. Of course. Thank you, Counselor. By the time that Troy departed, the smile had faded entirely, replaced by a small pensive frown. Non-essential, he muttered, brow quirking. Another first. At least she didn't take a look at the monitor. All right, he fobbed a little, not even fibbed, just failed to mention that the crew manifest and approved anthropological database hadn't been the only information he had learned, though most of the other files were restricted. He hadn't had any difficulty with some sonic help bypassing their security measures and accessing the real treasure trove. Technical schematics, star charts, even command codes and security protocols. In his defense, it wasn't like he was planning to do anything with them, though the schematics were giving him some thoughts about refitting the TARDIS for operating inside this universe. Rather, it was the very fact that they were locked away, sealed behind access codes and firewalls. He'd always had a terrible weakness for secret things, and the more hidden a nugget of information was, the more obsessive he tried to possess it. Besides which, as kind as these people appeared, he had been in more than enough dangerous situations to know that an escape plan is always advisable. He was learning at a truly unprecedented pace, if only because it had been so long since there had been so much to learn, but this talk of some mission nudged at his curiosity. So it was with a grunt that he plopped into his chair in front of the computer monitor, kicked his feet up, and rested them on the desk. Computer, show me all information related to the ship's current assignment. That information is restricted to senior staff and all applicable personnel. Are we going to have to do this every time? Rolling his eyes, he lifted his sonic screwdriver, and it buzzed, hummed, and clicked for a few moments. How about now? Displaying. I thought so. Information began to flick on the screen. Files. First, the mission briefing, as well as some information on specialized personnel and equipment that had been transferred to the Enterprise during her last pit stop for its completion. He fitted through it in minutes, filing everything away in his vast memory, but he was already getting a little bored until he came across the last set of files. They were scans of the Alteron system, and most importantly, its sun, displaying the elevated heat and radiation pouring from it, along with an analysis and theory as to the cause. Whoever had assembled the report had postulated that the development, though regrettably, was natural, the result of the star's self-consumption reaching a denser layer of fuel. But as the Time Lord's eyes flickered from the analysis to the details of the scans themselves, including the one the Enterprise's own sensors had just uploaded, he felt panic stir in his chest. Oh, no. Licking his lips, the doctor raised his voice, glancing up at the ceiling. Computer, can you put me in touch with the bridge? Affirmative. Do it! He waited a few seconds before realizing it would probably have been done before he called out. Hello up there! Doctor, we're about to begin an extremely time-sensitive operation, came the irritated voice of Picard. I'm afraid we don't have time to discuss your vessel's care with you at the moment. Yes, understandably, utterly so. Just, if I could just have a quick little... I'm afraid I won't have time to wait until we're finished. Picard out. Damn. Jaw tightening, the doctor leapt to his feet, head swiveling first, then right. He started to pace back and forth across the room, muttering under his breath, fingers twitching at his sonic screwdriver, and then in a shrill, blood-curdling high pitch, he approached the cabin door, screamed, "Oh God, there's something in here with me!" The pair of guards were then through the door in a flash, phasers out, eyes swiveling across the room, so alertly, in fact, that they completely failed to realize the Time Lord had pressed himself against the wall, just inside the doorway. The moment they had stepped inside, he was slipping out. Hands slapped the door control that's to shut it. Out popped his sonic screwdriver, a quick pass over the control, ensuring the guards would have a bugger of a time getting out of it again. Still, it wasn't going to keep them from using their little communicators to seek reinforcements, so the doctor was off like a flash. backtracking the path Data had originally led him until he found the turbolift he had written down to the deck. Stepping inside, he tucked his sonic screwdriver away in his pocket, tugging at his collar until he tried to plan just how he was going to get his point across most urgently. "Take me to the bridge!" "Captain, I sensed great sadness from him," Troy was confiding a mere moment after the doctor's communique had been interrupted their discussion. Seated on the bridge, the remainder of the crew were busy at work, beaming personnel and material down to the surface of Ultron 5's colony. "It's buried under layers of mania and determination, as if he was seeking simply to ignore the feelings, but they were there. When I spoke to him of death, I also sensed genuine fear of the concept, not simply unease of dying, but dread at the mere mention of it. It could be that he considers himself in some form of mortal danger." "From us or something else?" "I cannot say," Troy admitted. "But if you wish for my overall examination, he is far more than he appears, and far more than he acts." "Which is to say something, all things considered," Picard muttered, settling into his chair. "Thank you, Counselor. If this operation is concluded, I'll report to Starfleet on the incident. Perhaps we have information that could shed more light on the subject. In the meantime, I'd like to... Security to Lieutenant Worf!" Everyone on the bridge reflectively turned towards the Chief of Security, with Picard all but twisting in his chair to do so. Looking more than a little surprised at the influx of attention, the Klingon cleared his throat before tapping. "Worf here." "Sir, our guest just broke out of his quarters." "Broke out?" Worf's fingers tightened reflectively around the christening railing above his console. "Are either of you injured?" "No, sir. He didn't attack. He sort of tricked us, sir." Worf's brow was descending like thunderclouds, and his voice was a little more than a growl. "Tricked you?" "We thought that..." "Close transmission," Picard barked, climbing to his feet. "Computer, location of the Enterprise's newest occupant." "Most recent occupant is in Turbolift 12C, the computer replied primly. "What is the destination of the..." The answer came to from the computer, but the hiss of the turbolift doors behind Captain Picard's chair near the engineering console. Out of the burst the frantic, fidgeting Time Lord, bow tie askew, eyes very wide and fitting about before locking on the very angry Captain Picard. "Captain!" he announced, starting to make his way down the ramp. "It is vital that I speak with you immediately." The final words turned into a struggled gasp as Worf wrapped an arm around the doctor from behind, squeezing across his ribs and half hoisting him into the air. The Time Lord proved considerably more heavy than he expected, however, and his feet slowly sank back into a solid footing. No matter how sharply he wriggled, he couldn't break free. "Doctor, this is highly outrageous," Picard snapped. "I told you we would discuss this matter after the conclusion of our assignment. Mr. Worf, take him back to his quarters. Seal him in there if you have to." "You're making a ludicrously dangerous mistake," the doctor protested, heels dragging into the carpet as Worf bodily dragged him back towards the turbolift. The Klingons' lips were drawn back into a snarl because, though he wouldn't like to admit it to anyone, this half-starved-looking man was a quite bit stronger than he looked. Picard had already turned away, in the meantime determined to ignore the gibbering intruder, but the next man's words stopped him dead in his tracks. "And it's going to get every single colonist on that planet killed!"